All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're doing well and had a great weekend. Today, we'll kind of finish off our conversation around color, and we're going to talk about stationery, which is the next step in the corporate rebrand project. Um, just a heads up on what's going to happen in this class over the next few weeks. This week, we're going to have two lecture classes. So we'll be talking about stationery tonight, and then we'll continue talking about stationery and talk about the brand guidelines on Wednesday. And then next week, I want to have a critique, and that critique will happen over 2 days. So it'll be our first 2-day critique. I'll explain more about how that's going to work and what I want to look at next class. So that's what we're going to be doing. Before we start, I wanted to shout out this kind of online school called Type Electives that I think you might want to check out. It's brand new. It seems really interesting. I haven't attended any of their lectures yet. But one of the things I love about it is, first of all, there's a lot of prominent designers that are part of this that are teaching courses. And they're all free and they're all remote on Zoom. So these are different things that you can check out. There's one coming up a week from Friday with Shessa. And what do we want to say about Shessa? Shessa is a very prominent designer. They run a really awesome branding agency that tackles a lot of design for good causes. Very interesting designer that you definitely want to check out. I met them at the last Y conference. So check this out. Go see Shessa. It's free. You can optionally support with a donation, but I would say as a student, definitely no obligation to do this. And yeah, let me know how it is, because this is during my office hours. I'm going to try to score a recording of this somehow, but I really want to see what Shessa has to say. So anyways, something to check out. Okay, so let's talk more about color and more about why we hate Pantone. First of all, it's 15% off all plastic products. Okay, so that's interesting. By the way, the reason why they're talking about plastic products here is not just because they're selling plastic gifts, but an interesting thing about Pantone is it's not just color for print. You can also get plastics for products also in these colors. Okay, so that's actually what they're talking about here. But I want to talk a little bit about the process of actually selecting a color and how we apply that to something like a logo or brand. Okay, because we talked about the theory behind color last week. How do we actually put that into practice is what I want to talk about now. So the first question that I always get is, what do we start with, right? Like, let's say that we're trying to pick a color. Do we start by picking out the Pantone? Do we start by picking out the color in RGB? Or do we start by picking out the color in CMYK, right? Remember, we discussed those different color modes. And the answer to that question, if you want the most industry standard answer, is you start with the Pantone, okay? So by starting with the Pantone, you have a good kind of baseline, and then you can use the Pantone website, which now costs money, to make the conversions to CMYK and RGB. Okay, so that's the most standard way to work. But I'll tell you a little bit more about my process. And I actually start with just kind of exploring in RGB. Okay, so when I'm designing, I'm just kind of pushing pixels around. I'm trying out different things and I'm trying to get close to the solution. Okay, sorry, I think someone was unmuted there. I try to get close to the solution, just messing around in Illustrator using RGB. Okay, and from there, when I'm pretty sure that I have the right solution and the client is happy, then I open up the Pantone books and select a Pantone color that seems to have good conversion values for CMYK versus Pantone, and I kind of pick the colors from there. Okay, so that's generally the way that I work. And then from so having the Pantone colors, then I use the Pantone values to convert that to both RGB and CMYK. Okay, so that's personally how I work. I want to point you in the direction of a few resources. One of them is Pantone.com, which we already discussed, now costs money through their Pantone Connect program. I'm going to show you how this plugin works, but I would say as a student, just forget this. Okay, don't register for Pantone Connect. It's not worth $15 a month, but I'll show you how to use it so that you can apply this when you're out in the field. For this class, you might consider just using one of these converters. Okay, and there's a few of these that are out there. This basically takes a hex code value and it gives you a bunch of similar Pantone colors. Okay, so if you type in a hex code like 00D1B2, this represents an RGB color. It'll give you a bunch of colors that it sees as being similar to that color. Okay, as you can see, it doesn't get very close because this is the color that's represented by that hex code. And it's recommending a bunch of things that are pretty far off, to be honest. But it usually recommends some things that are a little bit closer, and you can just kind of find, using your eyeballs, a color that seems pretty close, and you can use that for this project. Okay. For a real client project, I would recommend actually looking at a Pantone book, because Pantone colors are never represented very nicely on screens. It's always tricky to look at a Pantone color on a screen and have that connect. So for a real client project, you should look at a Pantone book. But for, for this school project, since Pantone is now charging us money, let's just work through one of these online converters, and that will be good enough. Okay, so that's how you can pick out different Pantone colors. With Pantone books, there's always a 3 or 4-digit number that goes along with the color. The 3-digit numbers are kind of the older colors, and the 4-digit numbers are colors that they inserted into the system a little bit later, because they actually update the system with more and more colors. I think part of that is this conspiracy to get us to buy the new book. Okay, but aside from that, it is nice to have kind of in between colors, and that's usually where we get these 4-digit colors. And then the letter at the end represents coded versus uncoded paper. Okay, it looks like this particular converter works with coded, but coded and uncoded have subtle differences, and depending on the brand, you might be wanting to spec your colors from the uncoded Pantone book versus the coded Pantone book. For the purposes of this class, I think it's fine to just work with the C colors, which are for coded paper. Any questions about this? Okay. Let me go into Illustrator and let's look at this logo. Okay. I want to talk about how to convert this logo to different color modes. And I also want to talk about how to prepare this file for delivery for a client. Okay, because remember we watched Aaron Draplin, and he had all these great tips about how to work with logos and how to keep it live and kind of like finagle your way through the logo design process using a bunch of like white rectangles to cover up different bits and pieces. Okay, that's totally fine. That's the way I work. I think it's a good way to work. But at the end of the day, when you come up with the final logo, you have to make sure that it's built correctly. And you also have to make sure that it's properly prepared for client delivery. Okay. So a couple things that you definitely don't want to do when giving a logo to a client is you don't want to give them live type. Okay. So in this logo, in this combination mark, I have a piece of type, it's set in Caliber. And if I gave this logo to the client, there's a decent chance that they would try to apply it to something, and it would like replace the typography with like Arial or Myriad or something like that. The reason for that is if they don't have this font installed on their computer, if they go to open one of the files, like a PDF, if they open that in a program that can edit PDFs, it's going to replace the typography in the logo with kind of a generic font on their computer, like Arial. Okay. So if we send them a logo like this, then you'll probably one day see the logo on like a sign somewhere, and it'll be an Arial instead of Caliber, and it'll break your heart. Okay. So you never want to send them a logo with live type. To get around this, what we want to do before we send the file is outline our type. Okay. I've showed you this before, but it's a really basic option. It's available under type, and then convert or create outlines. Okay. Or you can just do Command-Shift-O. What that does is it converts the typography to shapes. Okay, so this is no longer editable type. This is basically just a rectangle in the case of the eye. Okay, so this is now just defined with anchor points, and it's not something that the client can edit, which means that even if they don't have Caliber on their computer, it's still going to render correctly because it's just a vector shape. Okay, so we always want to make sure to outline any type. The other thing we want to do is if we're working with any strokes, we want to make sure that those strokes are expanded. Okay, so for instance, in this particular logo, I have all these lines, and these lines are actually built out of strokes. Okay, it's actually totally fine to build logos out of strokes. I do it all the time. It's really efficient to use strokes to build certain things. So this is great. But the problem with delivering the logo to the client just like this is strokes have this weird property where sometimes when you scale strokes, they don't scale proportionately in terms of their weight. They keep their weight fixed despite the logo getting bigger or smaller. I'll show you what I mean. So up here we have the logo. Let's see what happens when I shrink down the logo. It turns into, what is this? Like a weird lips, okay? Because the strokes, even though I scale down the logo, are proportionately larger because they're still set at 12 points, okay? So despite the fact that I shrunk the logo down, the strokes are the same thickness as when the logo was big, which makes the logo look weird. Okay, the same is true if I take this logo and I make it huge. All of a sudden the lines look really thin because proportionally 12 points feels really thin in the context of a really large logo like this. So we don't want that. And by the way, there is an option. Okay, so if you are ever working with strokes and you do want to scale it up or down, there is an option to actually scale the strokes with size. Okay, so if you go to option, transform, scale, you can actually check this on strokes and corners, and that will make it so that in Illustrator, it actually does scale the weight of the strokes correctly. Okay, but that doesn't work for clients because we can't rely on clients being able to have that setting turned on. Okay, so for clients, what we want to do is called expanding our strokes. Expanding strokes basically just takes the stroke and, similar to type, where it turns it into a vector shape, does the same thing with strokes. Okay, so I'm going to select these strokes on top and go to Object, Expand. Okay, when I go to this option, it's going to give me a little window. It's going to ask whether I want to fill fills and strokes. I want to make sure that strokes are checked and click OK. That's going to convert these again to rectangle shapes. Okay, so these are now shapes. They don't have a stroke weight. And so these are going to scale correctly. Okay, let's do the same with these bottom pieces. Object, expand. Okay, that's going to create rectangles. Now we're good to go. Okay, we don't have any more strokes in this logo. So that is going to work better. And if we're trying to scale this logo, okay, even if I have the option turned off, it's going to scale correctly. So that's another important step to take. The final important step is we want to make sure that we don't have any like weird white boxes. Okay, so if I move this white box, you can see that whatever, I wanted to create a little cut through the lines here. And that makes sense because we want it to have good separation and work in one color and all that kind of stuff. But the problem with delivering a logo like this to the client is it's going to cause issues. And if you're not sure whether your logo is like prepared correctly for a client, one thing to try is to put it over an image. This is always like the ultimate test, right? Like what happens if you take this logo and put it over an image? Does it work or does it become problematic? Let me show you an example. Let me find an image. Okay, I don't have an image, so let's screenshot the background just to get an image. Okay, so here's a photo. If I take this and put it over the photo, you can see that it almost worked except for that white box, right? The white box works when we're on a white background, but obviously if we're over a photo, then all of a sudden it feels like there's a little white line there, which is not something that we want. Okay, so that's not working out. Let's move this back. So removing these white boxes is going to kind of depend on the situation, but one thing that often comes in handy with, these types of white boxes when they're covering up a piece of type is something called the Pathfinder tool. If you've never used the Pathfinder tool before, this is something that you definitely want to learn. Pathfinder is available kind of in the side bar, or if you don't have it here, and by the way, if you ever are missing something from the sidebar, you can always get to it through Window. Okay, so Window, Pathfinder, that will bring up these options here. The way Pathfinder works is it has the ability to kind of add together or subtract or modify different vector shapes in a variety of ways. So aside from this logo, let me kind of bring you down to the bottom here, and I'll make some circles. Let's make a green circle and a cyan circle. Okay, so if we have two shapes like this, these are separate shapes, but if for some reason we want to combine them together to create one shape, we can select both of them and then use this first option, which is called Unite, and that will combine it into a single object. Okay, so this is no longer two objects, it's not grouped. This is a single vector, and you can see it's defined, with just anchor points that define the outside edge. Okay, so that's Unite. And then there's also what's called minus front. Minus front will take whichever object is in front and use it almost as like a cookie cutter to like cut any other shapes that are overlapping with it. So if I select, again, both of these shapes and use minus front, it's going to take that blue shape, which is the shape in front, and it's going to cut out from the bottom shape. Okay, so this is the result I'm going to get. If I use this one, which is called intersect, that's going to take it's only going to give me the result of where the two shapes intersect. Okay, so if I choose this, I'll just get that middle portion. This is, by the way, kind of nice if you ever want to make like a leaf shape, right? Leaf shape is made out of the intersection between two circles. So you can use this to get kind of a leaf shape. And then lastly, we have this one, which I don't use that often. This is kind of the opposite of intersect. So it's going to like create one shape, but it's going to cut out the part that intersects. Okay, so you're going to get everything except for the intersection. There's also a bunch of options down here that you might explore. This one is really good. It's called Divide. And what Divide does is it gives you all these separate shapes. Okay, so if I now ungroup this, you can see that it kind of like gives me all these bits and pieces. And so it kind of like cuts it up. So I can work with these individually, which can come in handy. Like maybe I want the intersection between these colors to like go orange or something like that to create a little bit of a transparency effect. I could do that through divide. Okay, so that's the essentials of how Pathfinder works. Really important tool to know. Gina says, I just clicky between all the Pathfinder tools until I get the one I need, like trial and error. Fair enough, Gina. To be honest, mostly I just use these two. Okay, these are the ones that I use most commonly. Rachel says, do these Pathfinder options work with more than two objects? Rachel, yes, but sometimes it can get a little bit messy. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Like if I've got 3 circles and I combine, that works fine. If I do minus front, then it kind of did something weird, right? Sometimes it does things that you don't expect. So that's, a quirk that you have to kind of learn about Pathfinder. Okay, so in this situation, okay, this is I could use Pathfinder here, right? Because I've got, again, this white rectangle and it's kind of separating these 2 pieces. So I could use this and use minus front to subtract this from all these different pieces, right? But this is actually a situation, Rachel, where this wouldn't work very well with Pathfinder. Because if I select all these pieces, right? Like let's say I select all these and then select the white rectangle. The white rectangle is on top, but if I use this, it didn't really work, right? So that would be a situation where this doesn't work very well. Luke says, I like using the Shape Builder tool. Shape Builder tool is kind of like the new version of Pathfinder, okay? Shape Builder tool, I need to get on my radar because I've used Pathfinder for so long that I don't really use it. But yes, the Shape Builder tool does something really similar and is really, really intuitive. So you guys might check that out also. And as always, in Adobe programs, there's like 10 different ways to get to the final solution, okay? Okay, so I could use Pathfinder here, but I actually think probably better, right? To just take my shapes and just adjust them. Okay, so I can just adjust these up, make sure they snap to that shape, and just adjust them so they're the right height. Okay, obviously there are different ways that I could do this, but whatever. This is the most intuitive to me. Just gonna shorten these and snap them. By the way, if you don't have smart guides turned on, you should always use smart guides, okay? Smart guides are these little pink things that help you snap to different options. So, when I have smart guides turned on, and by the way, you can get to smart guides through view and smart guides right there. It'll kind of snap and tell me, okay, that's when I'm intersecting with that other shape, which in this case is the white box. So that guarantees that I'm kind of in the right place. If instead I turn smart guides off, then when I do this, I'm like, wait, how far should I go, right? It doesn't snap. And so it's kind of hard to know exactly when I should stop. And I'm probably going to accidentally stop a little too low or a little too high and it won't be perfect. Okay, so that's why smart guides are always great to have turned on. Let's go ahead and snap that down there. And then we can just delete the white rectangle. Okay, so now we're good to go. This is ready to be delivered to a client. If I put it over a photo, okay, it works fine. Obviously the blue on top of the blue is not working that great, but if I change this to white, okay, you can see that it punches out of the photo, totally fine. Okay, so that's always a good test. Any questions about any of these tools? Questions about this? Makes sense, right? This is important. Sometimes this can get a little complicated. So if you're working with a logo and you're like, I can't figure out how to get this and reduce it so that it's ready to be delivered to a client, just reach out to me, okay? Or we can even go over it in a critique because it might help everyone. Okay, so that's a really important process. Now what we have to do, oh yeah, go ahead.
I say, can I ask if you put it over that picture again, how it would look?
Actually, I just did that, Terry, but yeah, take a look. So when I put it on top, it's kind of hard to see because it's blue on blue, but a good sign is if I take the logo and turn it to white or turn it to another color, you can see that the entire logo comes with me. Okay, that's a good sign. If there's weird white boxes covering stuff up, then this will not work. Okay, so it's always a good sign when there's no stroke color, there's no kind of weird boxes that are unexpected. You want it to have that look of transparency. Okay, let's take a step back here. Okay, so this logo is now prepared for client delivery. But now we have to go through the process of converting it to all those different color modes. Okay, so like I mentioned, I like to start with RGB. And from there, when we're pretty close, I'm going to work with the client to select the Pantone color. A lot of times you want your client to approve the final Pantone colors. And then we have to deliver the files. Okay, let me show you how files get delivered in a logo project. Although this actually depends on the agency. Okay, different agencies have different ways to deliver logos, but it's not just like one file. It's not like, here you go, here's your logo, that's it. You have to deliver it in different color modes. And they're usually delivered with at least some kind of one-page guide just that gives you the basics. Okay, sometimes it's a full brand guidelines, which is like an entire document, but at the very least, even in a pretty minor logo project, it should come with like a little guide, kind of like this, that just defines like what are the colors, what are those color values, and some other really basic things. Okay, so that's what this is. This is just a one pager, and you can see that we have the color values, which are 325 for the turquoise and 2186 for the navy. And then we also have the CMYK values and the RGB values down below. Okay. In these files, we have a lot of different color modes. And this is why this process can be a little bit confusing, but this is important because you want to make sure that the client has the right files for different situations. If they're going to be doing a professional print, then you want to make sure that they're not using RGB files, because then the colors are going to come out inaccurate. If they're doing a CMYK print, you want to make sure that they're not using the Pantone files, because you want to make sure that it's set up for the correct print process. So you always want to give them RGB, Pantone, and CMYK. These are three different distinct set of files that you have to give them, and you have to make sure that the client understands when those should be used. We also give reversed, which is just white. Okay. And then we also give black, just an all black version. I don't really know why we do that, but we always did it. I guess it's kind of nice for the client, but the most important ones are RGB, Pantone, and CMYK. If I open up any of these files, you can see that there's a few different file formats. Again, this is going to depend on the agency and how they like to deliver their files, but EPS is the most standard way to deliver a vectorized logo file. EPS is kind of like an AI file, but it's a little bit of an older, more universal format. So that's how vector files are usually delivered. We also give PDFs, okay, because PDFs are a little bit more universal. This logo, by the way, has just the icon version and the full version, which is why there's 4 files total here, 2 in EPS and 2 in PDF. Okay, so those are the CMYK files. For the Pantone files, we have the same thing, okay, but these are going to be spec'd with Pantone colors. And then for RGB, we actually have more files, and that's because with RGB, we also give them JPEG and PNG, okay? This is good because if the client wants to just take the logo and stick it on a PowerPoint presentation or like in a little avatar on their Gmail account or something like that, it's good to give them a PNG and a JPEG. By the way, we don't give JPEG and PNG for print files like Pantone and CMYK because I can't think of a single situation where you want to do a professional print with your logo being like a JPEG. That's just not really good workflow. Okay, so JPEG and PNG just for RGB. Yeah, go ahead.
So, but when we're basically the illustrator is going to do all of this for us, yes? Like, is there just a button that we push that makes all of this happen?
No, I wish that there was, Gina. So let me show you that process, because we do have to kind of go through and organize these files. So let's do this. Let's kind of build out these different color modes and make that conversion. Okay. So here's the logo file. And one thing you need to kind of be aware of is what mode is your document in? Okay. If you go to File and Document Color Mode, you can see that there's 2 different types of documents. There's RGB color and CMYK color. You want to make sure that you're in RGB color when you're delivering or when you're creating the files that are for RGB. You want to make sure that you're in CMYK color when you're delivering the files for print. Okay, so CMYK you would use both for Pantone and for the CMYK files. So let's start with the RGB files, which are here. Okay, we need to go through and make sure that these colors are aligned with the final color values that are coming from the brand guidelines. In this case, I'm using the brand guidelines, but this could just as easily come from the Pantone conversions that you have to make those conversions. Okay, so we know that turquoise wants to be this hex code. Okay, by the way, if you don't know what a hex code is a 6-digit code that represents a specific RGB color. It's actually a really cool system. RGB is built out of course, 3 components: red, green, and blue. Each one of those components can span anywhere from 0 all the way to 255. Okay, if it's at 0, it means that that color is turned off. Okay, so if I take all of them to 0, I'll just get black. If it's up to 255, that means it's turned all the way to its full brightness. So if I take, for instance, red and green all the way to their full brightness, I get yellow. If I turn blue also to its full brightness, then I get white. Okay, so that's how the RGB system works. And that is represented by this 6-digit code. Okay, so when you're looking at a hex code, the first 2 numbers, which can also have letters in them, go from or represent the value of red. Okay. The second 2 digits represent the value of the green, and the last 2 digits represent the value of the blue. Okay, so that's how that works. So if you have 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, that means that all the pixels are turned off, and therefore you have black. If you have F, 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 okay, and by the way, each one of these digits goes from 0 to F. It's kind of weird, but it's because it's hexadecimal. That's why it's called a hex code. So it's base 16. So you go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you go to A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, so each one of these digits do that. So when I do all Fs, that's going to be white. Okay, if all these digits are the same, by the way, you're always going to get some kind of value of gray. So for instance, 999, 999 is going to be kind of a middle gray. If I do something like E, A, E, A, E, A, that's also going to be a gray. Okay, because this is the representing 234 for red. This is representing 234 for green. This is representing 234 for blue. And anytime we have all those values identical, we're going to get some kind of neutral gray. Okay, so that's how that hex code works. Okay, let's do a little quiz. What is this color going to be? 5, 6, E, A, F2. What's that color going to be? You don't have to know this, by the way.
How would we know that?
How would we know it? Anyone have a guess? Okay, let me think about what I think it's going to be. Okay. I think this is going to be a somewhat muted kind of purple color. Okay, that's my guess. It's going to be, yeah, it's going to be kind of a bright, muted, but slightly muted purple color. No, I was totally wrong. Okay, never mind. Okay, so anyways, I don't even know how these codes work. Okay, but anyways, if you copy this code, you're always going to get that unique color. Okay, if you know how to read hex codes, you're like next level. Okay. Should we try one more? Let's try one more. 3, 3. No, actually, let's do C2, 8, 1, F2. What's this going to be? Okay,
Brown.
so we know we have a lot of blue in there, right? And we know we have a lot of red in there. Okay, we have kind of a middle amount of green. So this is actually, I got confused last time. This is going to be more like a purple. This is going to be kind of a brownish, muted purple. That's my guess. Okay, I got kind of close that time. Last time I think I got confused. Okay, anyways, that's how hex codes work. Okay, hex codes are great because you can always just tell the development team or whatever you're working with, you give them that 6-digit code and they'll know exactly what that represents. Okay, so that's what a hex code is. All right, so back to the show here. Let's grab the correct hex code for the turquoise, copy and paste that from the document. By the way, if you want to get to this little dialogue, if you just click on the color, okay, you're going to get your swatches. If you shift click on this color, you'll get this alternate dialog that will bring up kind of the different components of that and will also allow you to bring in your hex code. Okay, so that's how I do it. You can also do it, down here, but I like to do it up here for whatever reason. Okay, so there's the correct code for the turquoise. Okay, so that looks good. New drinking game. Yeah, that is a good drinking game, actually, but only for a very specific audience. Okay, navy. Okay, for the navy, we got 003356. These are all kind of low numbers. That's why we're getting kind of a dark color. Let's select all of the navy components and plug that in. It actually is already correct. Okay, so there we go. This is ready to be saved for an RGB delivery. Okay, so if I wanted to save this, for instance, as an EPS, I can go to save as. I can choose EPS, which is right here, and I can save that. And that will be the RGB file. Okay, so there we go. There's RGB. Next, let's do CMYK. Okay, so remember when we're going to CMYK, actually let's do Pantone. Okay, when we're doing CMYK or Pantone, we want to switch our document color mode to CMYK. Okay, we don't want to be in RGB. By the way, you can always check in the little tab of the document. It'll tell you whether it's CMYK or RGB. Okay, so now we're in CMYK. And what we want to do is convert these colors to Pantone. So we know the Pantone values, right? Pantone 325 is what we're shooting for here. In order to actually select a Pantone color in Illustrator, that's not one of these options. Actually, it is because I have them plugged in there. But in order to get these in our swatches so that we can apply them, that's where we have to use the plugin. Okay. Back in the day, these were actually built into Illustrator. You could actually go into this little kind of weird hamburger menu and you could find all the Pantone colors in here. Now they just have the metallics and the CMYK, which is not really useful. now we got to use this plugin. Okay, so if you want to use Pantone Connect, you've got to install this extension. You got to log in. Okay, so you have to go through a little bit of a process to get this. Once you're logged into Pantone Connect, you get this little nifty thing that requires you to have internet access. And how do we use this? Okay, what we can do is we can go into search and we can search for the color we want, which I think was 325. Yeah, 325U. Okay, so let's go back here and type in 325 and do a little searchy search. Here we go. Okay, so here's the different values. This is the one we want, except we wanted uncoded, which is down here. Okay, so the best way to work from this is just to click on these little dots and add to your swatches. Okay, so that will add it to my actual swatches up here. Okay, I actually already had this in my swatch, which is why it didn't do anything. But anyways, that's how this works. Okay, and once I have that, I can go in here and select all of those turquoise elements and choose this swatch. Okay, and this color is now created using Pantone colors. Okay, so if I shift click this, you can actually see that it no longer has component colors. It just is 100% of Pantone 325U. Okay, that's how spot colors work. And yeah, a printer that is, understands Pantone will be able to understand what this is and will premix those colors to print out the correct color for the final logo. Okay, so there we go. That's for the Pantone. For the turquoise, let's get the right color code for our navy, which is Pantone 2186. Okay, 2186. Dun, dun, dun. Let's go to uncoded and let's add that to our swatches as well. All right, and let me close this annoying dialog box that's too big. Select all of our navy elements and let's assign that to the Pantone color 2186. Okay, that's how we do it. Notice, by the way, that this looks really ugly. It kind of ruined it, right? But that's okay. The reason for that is because Pantone colors look weird on screens. Yeah, so Bianca, you're right. It looks lighter. But I promise you, if you actually printed this, it would look as close as possible to the navy color that is being represented by the RGB. This is why it's important to not just go by what you see on the screen when selecting Pantone colors for a real client, but to actually look at the books. Because blue colors, any dark blue colors, especially on uncoded stock, end up printing a little darker than you think. So despite the fact that this looks kind of light on the screen, when you printed it, it would look correct. Okay, so you can't really just go with what it looks like on Adobe. It has to be done through Pantone color books, which is why they're able to just charge us $15 a month for nothing. And this is also why it's important to explain to your clients to use the correct files. Because imagine if you made that other logo for the client, right? But then all of a sudden you go to their social media account and it's like they use these colors because they didn't realize that they weren't supposed to use the Pantone color for their social media, right? So that's why it's important that they understand which files are used for what. Okay, so this is now ready to be saved and delivered in a Pantone format. And we could save this in the same way, just as an EPS. Okay, so that's what that looks like. And then last but not least, actually, this is kind of least. CMYK is the least common denominator. So last and least, we have CMYK. CMYK is defined by 4 different component colors, one for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And there's no kind of nifty hex code for CMYK, so we just have to trust the values, or we just have to input the values individually. Okay, so that's how CMYK works. One thing I'll mention is that we can actually convert directly through Illustrator for CMYK. Okay, so let's say that we wanted to take this blue, which is currently a Pantone color, and we wanted it to be CMYK instead. We can actually click on this little hamburger menu up here and just say, hey, let's convert that to CMYK. All right. And what will happen is Adobe will look at the Pantone color, all the color values that are kind of embedded in that Pantone swatch, and it will use its own kind of algorithm to make a judgment call about how to break this down into CMYK. All right. So you can do that. But the problem with doing this is Adobe often doesn't really do a good job with this. Okay. So I don't trust the default kind of Adobe values because they often end up looking incorrect. What I always go with is the Pantone values. Okay. And you can get that in things like the color bridge, which I showed last class, right? Where it shows you those different CMYK values. You can also get it through Pantone Connect. Okay. So if I go in here and, okay, to be honest, I don't remember exactly where to get this, but somewhere in here, it'll tell you what those CMYK values are. I got to figure out this plugin. I'm new to this. Okay, so somewhere in here, maybe it's in color data. There's the hex code. No, that's how you build the pan. Okay, somewhere in here, there's the CMYK values. Okay, I apologize. I don't know exactly where it is, but that's what I would trust. Okay, I would always trust the Pantone values rather than the Adobe auto convert, because these Pantone conversions are done by like colorists who just, all they do is think about color. Okay, so they're like scientists that all they do is color. So I trust their values way more than Adobe. Okay, so these values that are in this document are taken from that Pantone document. So let's go ahead and plug that in. We've got 100, 34, 0, 32. 100, this is a test to see if I can remember 4 numbers at once. 100, 34, 0, 32. Is that right? How'd I do? Okay, I got it. Okay, so there's the CMYK values for that color. Okay, so that's defined and ready to go. And let's do the same for the turquoise. Okay, I'm going to shift click this and change it to CMYK. Once again, this is not going to be quite correct. So let's make sure it's aligned with the official values, which are 52,024. Okay, 52,024. Okay, so again, this looks a little weird. It looks wrong, but again, we're trusting the Pantone colors, and we can actually verify that by looking at the Pantone book and cross-referencing those colors. So this looks weird, but this is actually correct. And this, if we're printing in CMYK, is going to give us the best chance of getting the color values that we want in the final print. Okay, so this can be saved, and that's how you would create those CMYK colors. Any questions on this? Okay. One other thing I want to point out is there's some pretty cool tools for actually building your color palettes. One of those tools that I really like is called color.adobe.com. This is another product that Adobe bought. It used to be called Cooler, but it's been bought by Adobe. Okay. Couple different ways that you can use this tool. And one of those ways is you can go to the Explore tab. I actually quite like the Explore tab because you can just type in like random words. Like you can type in like, you know, what do we want to type in? Vivid. Oops, here we go. Vivid. And it'll give you a bunch of palettes that are kind of tagged with that attribute. Okay, so a bunch of different Vivid palettes. These are really great. You can even like, you can either download them as a JPEG, or you can just bring them directly into your library if you're signed in the Adobe website, which is really, really cool. Bianca says, can you search by hex code? I don't know. Let's see. Let's try 52E3E41. Okay, that's a classic. Let's see. No, sorry, nothing. Okay, so nothing in the Explore tab. But where we probably can do that, Bianca, is in the Create tab. Okay, the Create tab is a tool that helps you build palettes based on different color rules. So down here, you can see those hex codes, and I could type in a hex code here, like 34E5F2. Okay, and it's going to show me what that color looks like. And then it's going to show me 4 other colors that are kind of based on a certain rule that we select. Okay, so for instance, if we choose what's called a complementary palette, we can select one color. Okay, so if we select, you know, red, for instance, as a color, it's going to give us the complement, which is opposite in the hue wheel. Okay, so directly across in the hue wheel, that's where you have what's called a complementary color. The complement of reds are greens. Okay, so this will give you that type of complementary palette. Some complementary palettes work better than others. The green red can be a little tricky because it always feels like Christmas. It also is like a little bit of a harsh palette sometimes. Okay, so oftentimes if you want to go red green, it's better to go to like magenta green so you don't run into that issue. And then you of course have classics like blue orange. Blue orange is used everywhere. There's so many brands that use this color combination. This is an example of a complementary palette that really, really works. A lot of brands like to be blue because blue is very trustworthy. Okay. And the complement to that is yellow. So you get a lot of palettes that have that kind of blue, yellow, or blue, orange kind of thing going on. So that's how complementary palettes work. You also have what's called split complementary, which is where you choose a color and it gives you some complementary colors that are split apart a little bit. So you have some different options. Double split complementary, okay, has complements and then the complements of those complements. And then you have things like monochromatic, which has all of the colors on the same hue. Analogous, which has colors, but then also colors that are close to that color. Triad, which has 3 equidistant colors on the color wheel. Okay, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this can be helpful along with that Explore tab. So that's a color tool that I really like. There's also one more that I'll point out called Coolors. Coolors. These kind of color palette generators can be really nice. Okay, sure. Let's accept the cookies. Because you can just generate colors really, really easily. And it kind of has this randomize effect where you can click, it generates a random palette. And if you like it, you can use it, or you can just generate more palettes, right? So every time I click space, it generates a new palette. And sometimes this is good because I don't know about you guys, but I actually really struggle with color sometimes. And sometimes I like forget that colors, like I forget about certain colors. I know that sounds weird, but when I go into a site like Coolors, I'll press spacebar and I'm like, oh yeah, that color exists. Who forgot about tan? You know what I'm saying? Like I forgot about tan. So that's like a whole new color that I can use. Okay. So Coolors can really get your mind going along with some of these different tools. Okay, so those are just a few resources for you all. And that's a little bit of an important process to know when you're delivering files to a client. For the final delivery of this logo, I am going to require you all to submit Pantone, CMYK, and RGB values, just so that you have this process down. I'm not going to require you to submit all those different files, okay, but I will have you submit those color codes so that I know that you're thinking about how to convert between those different systems. And once again, oops, I accidentally closed it, but a really simple color converter like the one I showed works totally fine for this class. No need to spend a ton of money on Pantone Connect. Okay, let's take a quick break. Let's come back at 6:47, and we'll talk about stationery. See you all in a little bit. All right, everyone, let's talk about stationery. This is going to be the next step in the corporate rebrand project. And I want you all to create a stationery system because this is something that pretty much all businesses need. And so it's an important skill to learn and understand. Let's go through what stationery is and look at some different examples. And then we'll start today with building a simple stationery system. We'll finish that up on Wednesday. So first of all, the spelling of stationery is with an E. Okay, there's actually two different words. Stationary with an A is when you're like not moving. That's stationary with an A. Stationary with an E is when we're referring to what we're talking about in this lecture, which are different printed materials that help us facilitate communication. So don't make this spelling error. I see this spelling error so often in the industry. And so, yeah, stationary with an E. And I remember when I was going through this class, I had Candace Lopez, which you might all have had for graphic design history. She was my instructor when I went through this program for the branding class. And the thing that she told me, which I literally always remember to this day, is E, like part of a stationary system is an envelope. Envelope starts with E. And so stationary is spelled with an E. It's so simple, but I always remember that. Okay, so spell with an E for envelope. By the way, another thing I'll mention about this is at the portfolio review, which is something that happens every year, there's like a few of the professionals that always come to the portfolio review that very specifically look for this mistake. Like, I don't know why they do it, but they like look for this mistake because they like calling people out on it, which is weird to me, but I guess it makes sense because in our industry, we're meant to be detail oriented. Okay, so it's on us to make sure that we're catching all these little mistakes. So anyways, let's call each other out if we misspell this word. Jared says it probably has to do with how it's pronounced. Yeah, how does it pronounce? Stationary, stationary. I think the E is a little bit more correct how it's pronounced. Yeah. Stationary has ER as in paper. That's pretty good too, Terry. So two different ways that we can remember it. Okay. So what are some of the elements of a stationary system? Like I mentioned, stationary are different pieces that help us facilitate communication in the context of business or other types of communication, but for the purposes of this project, in the context of business. Some of the common pieces that go into a stationary system are, of course, the business card. Okay, business card is really, really important. I get a lot of students who are like, oh man, we're designing business cards. It's 2023. Business cards are so passe. And you're not wrong that business cards are probably not as important as they used to be, but they're still important. Okay, every client I've ever worked for really cares about their business card. And there are certainly contexts where you still exchange business cards, whether it's at some kind of networking event or some kind of trade show. Business cards are important. Okay, so don't neglect business cards. They are things that people still care about and use. And then we have what's called a letterhead. Okay, letterheads are basically big, not big. They're usually letter size paper, which is 8.5 by 11. And they have some basic information printed on them, but they also have a lot of blank space because the way that you use a letterhead is you feed it through a regular office printer to print a letter on top of it. And that way you kind of have your logo and some other branded elements or information on the letter that's already pre-printed. Okay, so that's how a letterhead works. Don't worry, we'll look at a lot of examples of these different things. You have envelopes, okay? Sometimes you have folders. Those can be pocket folders or other kinds of folders. Note cards and thank you cards are really common because we want to be able to send notes or send thank yous out to our clients or to people we're doing business with. And then there's a ton of other things that are part of this system. Okay, I'll show you more examples of that coming up. But yeah, these are some of the essential elements of a stationary system. And one of the goals when you're creating a stationary system is to create a unified lockup of information between all these different pieces. So we don't want every single piece to look completely different. We want to establish a system and apply that system consistently to these different pieces as a general rule. So here's an example of a stationary set from a law firm. One of the reasons why clients kind of obsess over their stationery is because it makes them look more professional, right? When you have a really nice stationery system, it makes you look more professional. And in a way, it kind of justifies, the high costs that you're charging. So for instance, if you're a law firm and you're charging a certain hourly rate that's really high, when your client gets a letter from you or gets a packet of, files or materials or gets your business card, the fact that it's really nice and considered and has the right kind of sophisticated look, in a way sells the client on the fact that your high rate is worth it. So that's why clients really care about this, because it raises their profile. And sometimes it even makes them more money, because all of a sudden they look really put together and people don't hesitate to pay their high rates. So I think this is a really nice system. There's a few things that I'm maybe questioning in here, but you can see kind of how this all comes together. And we're working with a very unified lockup. So for instance, the information on the envelope has the same lockup as the information on the business card. That has the same lockup on some kind of folder that we're looking at down below. Okay, we're seeing a little bit of a zoom in of that lockup. Okay, we've got different labels that are being applied to different pieces of information. We've got the address, and then we have the logo. We've got a very specific color palette that we're keeping consistent, and there's also some patterned elements using this kind of circle dot pattern. And they're using some special materials like folded kind of slip sleeves for documents, and also some kind of copper metallic foil that they're applying to those elements, which looks really good. Okay, so you can see that the details are all there. This looks very put together. I have to say, if I got this, like, okay, hopefully I don't have to like use a lawyer, because lawyers are annoying and expensive. But if I got this from a lawyer, I'd be like, okay, this looks pretty legit right here, right? Because it's all packaged with nice unity, and it looks really elegant and sophisticated and considered. Okay, so this is just an example of a stationery system. For this project, you're going to be creating stationery for your corporate rebrand company. Okay, so whatever that company is, you're going to be creating stationery. Some of you might be like, oh man, why do I have to create stationery? Stationery is such a businessy thing, and I'm doing something that's more retail oriented. But even companies that are, not focused on doing a bunch of business deals behind the scenes, they're still going to have all these stationery elements. Okay, pretty much every business has all of these things if they're of a certain size. So for this project, I want you to create 3 different required pieces of stationery that I want everyone to create. And then I'm going to give you all the opportunity to create one other of your choice. Okay, so everyone in this project is going to design a business card, a number 10 envelope, and a letterhead. Okay, those 3 are required as part of the project. And then you pick one other element of your choice that you want to design. Okay, that can be a thank you card, it can be a postcard, it can be pencils or pens, it can be an invoice or a folder, it can be a mailing tube or a large envelope. It can be a mailing label. Email signatures are also kind of cool. This is more of a digital application, but the little kind of signature at the end of your email, that's a really important touch point for your stationery system. Could be some kind of writing pad. Okay, so those are other stationery elements that you can design, but you can also design a piece of collateral. Okay, collateral is similar to stationery, but it's a little bit different, because stationery is about doing communication. Collateral is more like marketing or advertising. So that would include things like brochures, flyers, notebooks, branded tapes, binders, portfolios. It could be a newsletter, a magazine, or a map. It could be a key card or some kind of key, employee badge, gifts, a tote bag, or anything. Okay, I would say anything that has the logo on it could work for your 4th item. Okay, so just to reiterate, everyone's going to create 3 stationery elements. These are required. And then the 4th one is up to you. And it could be anything in this list, okay, or anything that you think of. Sometimes the coolest things are things that are very specific to your business. Okay, so if you're doing some kind of interesting business that has a very specific use case, you might design something specifically for that use case. Jer says, is this tied in with a corporate rebrand project or something else? This is for the corporate rebrand. Okay, so whatever you're doing for your corporate rebrand, you're going to create stationery for that. So for instance, Luke, who's doing the IKEA corporate rebrand, is going to design a business card, a number 10 envelope, and a letterhead for IKEA. And then he's also going to choose one other element of his choice. And Luke, yeah, you can do employee uniforms. I'll be pretty flexible with you on that 4th item. Okay, so I will say if your logo is on there, then you're probably good. Okay, other questions about this before we go into more detail? Okay, so everyone's designing 4 different pieces. Let's talk about the business card. Okay, like I mentioned, business cards are important. And the standard size of a business card is 2 inches by 3.5 inches. That is the standard size. Can you deviate from the standard size? Yes. Okay, you can absolutely deviate from the standard size. But one thing to consider with going to a weird size business card is it can be a little bit annoying, right? Sometimes it's actually good to follow those conventions. Because if you have a business card that is the standard size, then it's going to fit together nicely with a stack of business cards from other companies. If your business, let's say your business card was like 6 inches by 6 inches, that would just be annoying, right? I would be really annoyed to get a huge business card like that because it would just be unwieldy and it wouldn't really serve its purpose. Okay. Small business cards can sometimes be cool. But one downside with small business cards is they can sometimes get lost. Like if you have a little mini business card, which are somewhat popular, it can kind of fall out of the stack and get lost. So that has a little bit of a downside. It may be worth it, right? Maybe you really want to convey that you're different and you don't want to follow those standards. Or maybe there's some kind of cool concept that you can convey through a business card that is a different size. Or maybe your business is really interested in environmental sustainability and you want to show that you're using less paper by going with a smaller business card. That's totally fine. Okay, that decision is up to you, but just know that the standard is a good default because that convention is really well established. And when you're working with business cards, it's nice to have that standard size. Okay, but that is the normal size. Some things that are included on a business card is always the logo, and sometimes also in addition, the company name. Okay, especially if you have a logo that doesn't really include your company name, then the company name should also be included, but at the very least, the logo should be on there. Business cards are created for an individual person. Okay, so in addition to the logo or the company name, you also need to have the name of the person who the business card is for. Okay, so their name and their title. So for instance, at San Diego City College Graphic Design, I have a business card. Sean made it for me. Okay. And it has San Diego City College Graphic Design on there, but it also has my name and job title on there. Okay. Which is Associate Professor, Bradford Prairie. Okay. The physical address is sometimes included. And I would say most of the time it is included, but sometimes not. Some businesses don't really care to include their physical address. A good example of that is if you have a business that mostly works online, maybe they don't really want people coming to their office and they won't even include their physical address. Also, physical addresses take up a lot of space on a business card. So sometimes they're omitted just because they're a little busy. And, again, if no one's going to really come to your office, it might not be worth including. If you have a business that is very much focused on, meeting in person, then the physical address would be definitely recommended and mandatory. Okay, so you make a judgment call about whether the physical address is needed there or not. Website is always included. Every business has a website. Your website address should always be on your business card. Email address should always be included as well. Okay, email is probably the main way that communication is done in the context of most businesses. So you always want to have that email address on there. Remember that this is a business card for an individual person, which means the email address should also be for that specific person. So, if you're doing a business card for Toyota, for instance, I don't want the email address to be like information@toyota.com. Okay. It shouldn't be some kind of generic email address. It should be the email address for that specific person. So if you're doing a business card for Jane Doe and her title is sales associate at Toyota, right? The email address should be like jane.doe@toyota.com. Okay. So it should be something that is specific to that person. The same is generally true for phone numbers. Okay. And phone numbers get a little bit complicated. First thing I'll say about phone numbers is they're not always included on a business card, but they usually are. Generally speaking, it's worth including the phone number, but there are some situations, including myself. I don't think I have my phone number on my own business card. The reason for that is I don't really like phone calls, right? I want to be able to hand out my business card without the threat of someone actually calling me because I don't like it when people call me. I'm like, no, send me an email. Right. So it kind of depends on the individual person. When you do include a phone number, sometimes there's multiple phone numbers because there might be a phone number for the general office line. There might be some kind of direct line or extension that gets included for, transferring to an individual person's office phone. There's often a mobile phone and sometimes there's even a fax number. Okay, so there could be up to 4 phone numbers on a business card, which gets really confusing. Generally speaking, I prefer it when clients opt for a business card that doesn't have an overload of information. So I'm usually advocating to the client to remove unnecessary things. I'm always like, hey, you don't need the fax number. Like, forget about the fax number. No one's faxing. But sometimes clients really care about fax numbers, and there's certain business categories that still use faxes all the time, like law. Okay, so phone number depends on the client, depends on the situation. Any questions about any of the things that go on a business card? All right. Let's talk about the letterhead. So remember that the letterhead is mostly blank. Okay, you want the letterhead to mostly be blank space. The reason for that is this is something that is going to be fed through a printer to print on some kind of letter. Okay, so a letterhead should have some basic information, but that information should be kept more or less on the perimeter to leave mostly blank space on the page for someone to actually print whatever they want to send off in a letter through the mail. Okay, business letterheads are always done in either letter size or A4 size. Letter size is 8.5 by 11. That's the standard in North America. A4 size is an international size. Okay, it's somewhat similar to letter, but it's just a little bit different. So you can make your decision about letter versus A4. In North America, letter is the standard. On the business letterhead, you need, of course, the logo and or the name of the company. Okay, because we need to know who's sending the letter. The physical address on a letterhead is mandatory. Okay, so even if on your business card you decide to not include the physical address, I would include it on the letterhead. The reason for that is when you're sending a letter to someone, that is a correspondence that's coming through the mail, right? So you want to make sure that you, the person who receives it has your address so they can return the message, right? So the physical address is considered mandatory on a letterhead. And then sometimes you include additional things. Like it's really common to include the website address. It's pretty common to include the phone number. And sometimes you even include things like the tagline. Okay. Traditionally speaking, if you ask a really old school branding person, they'll tell you not to put the phone number on the letterhead. And that's because the letterhead is all about, correspondence through physical mail. But I think the phone number is fine on a letterhead. And a lot of businesses like to do this because, hey, maybe you get a really crazy letter and you want to pick up the phone and give them a call. Okay. So including that phone number is definitely not a mistake. Although, again, traditionally speaking, the phone number is not included on the business letterhead. Unlike the business card, the letterhead is more generic. Okay. So for a business card, remember, we're creating the card for a specific person like Jane Doe, who's a sales associate at Toyota. For the letterhead, generally speaking, this is not individualized to a specific person. So Jane Doe would be using the same letterhead as someone else at Toyota. Okay, so this is more general information, and the letterhead would usually be printed for the entire office to use. There are some circumstances where, an executive person would have customized letterhead that would have their name and title on it, but usually not. Okay, and for this class, you're just going to do just kind of the more generic letterhead. So no need to include Jane Doe, job title, anything like that. Okay, that is not required on the letterhead. Any questions about the letterhead? All right. Excuse me. Let's talk about the number 10 envelope. Envelopes are the hardest piece in this whole stationery set, and they're also the easiest to make crucial mistakes on. Okay, so let's talk through some of the pitfalls of creating an envelope. First of all, in this project, we're going to create what's called a number 10 envelope. This is the standard business size envelope. It's the kind that you get in the mail if you're getting like a bill from the electrical company or something like that. Okay. And this size is 9.5 by 4 1/8. Okay. That's the size of a number 10 envelope. By the way, the reason that it's this size is because this is the size that fits a letter size sheet folded into thirds. Okay. So traditionally speaking, you take your letter that is printed on your letterhead, you fold that into 3 parts, you stuff that in a number 10 envelope, and you send it. Okay, so that's what this standard number 10 envelope size is for. On an envelope, you are going to, of course, include the logo or the name of the company. That is really important. And always, you're going to include your return address. So similar to the letterhead, where the physical address is a must, same is true on the number 10 envelope, because we need to know who sent this mail. And the address that's printed on a number 10 envelope also serves as the return address. So if something goes wrong and the recipient, you made a typo in the recipient's name, it'll be sent back to your office via that return address, which makes it really, really important. And then also important for the number 10 envelope is that you follow postal requirements. This is where you really don't want to mess things up, because if you don't follow postal requirements, you might cause serious issues for your client. Okay, so let's go through what those postal requirements are. So there's different kind of sections that are blocked off by the post office for different parts of the envelope. Okay. So in this top left corner, this is where the post office is expecting the return address. So when you create your envelope, on the front of the envelope, generally speaking, you want your return address to be somewhere in this top left corner, because when the post office sees the address there, they're going to know that that's the return address. Okay. So that's where the return address typically goes. There are some other places that you can put the return address, but this is the most dependable place to put it. If you put it there, you won't ever run into issues. If you get a little creative on your return address, it'll probably work, but it might cause some issues. Okay, so that's the best place for the return address to go. And then you have what's called the indicia area. The indicia area is where the postage gets applied. So if you're using, for instance, a stamp, you would apply the stamp in the top right corner. But a lot of office mail is sent without a stamp, and a lot of offices use a little special postal printer to weigh and print the correct postage for a specific piece of mail. Okay, and that always goes in the top right corner. So the indicia, you have to keep that clean because that's where that postage goes. If you put something weird there, okay, let's say you get really creative and you're like, oh man, I want to make my envelope really cool. Let's put like a capybara in this top. Okay, that's going to cause issues, right? Because the capybara, okay, we like the capybara, but all of a sudden, like when we try to print postage here, the post office is not going to be able to read it. Okay, so that's going to cause problem. And that's why with envelopes, you generally want to keep things blank. You want to keep things clean. You don't want to get over creative with, sorry, I'm on capybara TikTok. Is anyone else on capybara TikTok? Okay, never mind. Terry says, can you put the return address on the back? Terry, yes. Probably the second best place to put the return address is on the back flap. Okay, so if we flip the envelope over, putting the return address over here is, I would say, pretty reliable. Yeah, going to cause problems. True. Okay. So indicia, you want to keep that clear. And then we have what's called the OCR read area. This is where the recipient's address and name is going to go. So if we're sending a letter to, Cox Cable, right, we're going to put the name of the company, the recipient, and their address in this area. Okay, so this is another place that you want to keep clear. Notice how the front of the envelope, you pretty much have to keep the whole thing clear. There's not too many places where you can get ultra creative. And it's okay, It's okay to have a simple envelope. That is totally fine. And then at the bottom, this is what's called the barcode clear zone. The post office prints a barcode here. That barcode helps the post office sort and distribute mail. So again, if we put something weird in this corner, it's going to cause problems for the post office. They're just going to get mad at you because they're going to print their barcode, and all of a sudden their barcode's not going to scan because it's fighting with whatever weird illustration you put there. Okay, so leave that clear. You want to leave all these areas clear. What happens if you get this wrong? Well, a couple things can happen. One thing is you can cost your client more money, okay? Because, if you ever send an envelope or you send a letter and you put a stamp in the top right corner, okay, a stamp, and what does a stamp cost these days? I think it's like 57 cents or something like that. Okay, when you put a stamp on an envelope,
Cents.
how much is it?
63.
Oh my gosh. Okay, inflation. All right, so 63 cents to send a letter. Okay, when you put a stamp on an envelope, you're actually paying for something called first class mail. First class mail is actually a very expensive rate to send an envelope. And it's not expensive. 63 cents is very reasonable. But in the context of all the pricing that you could pay to send a regular envelope, 63 cents is actually quite a bit. Okay. And when you pay for first class mail, the post office will send it even if things are like messed up. Okay. But if you're a business, especially a business that's sending out a lot of mail, like let's say you're working for like State Farm Insurance, they send a lot of mail because, there's a bunch of monthly statements, there's a bunch of advertisements, there's a bunch of bills that they need to send out, right? They probably send out like 1 million envelopes a month. That's probably not right, but whatever. They send out a lot of envelopes. And so for them, they're not going to pay first class mail for every single envelope. They're going to pay a lower rate. And one of the ways that they can get a lower rate is by not having to pay for first class mail. Okay, so if your envelope is very optimized for the post office to be able to machine read and distribute your envelope without having to like hand sort it because you did a bunch of weird stuff, they're going to give you a lower rate. And if you have to hand sort it due to all these different issues that can arise. Okay, so if your envelope is constructed wrong, you might end up making it so your client has to pay first class mail, which could cost them a lot of money over the long run. Some clients might not care about that, by the way. Just being honest, right? Like if you are, I don't know, some kind of expensive law firm and you're only sending out 20 envelopes a month, because most of your stuff is done through email, you probably don't care if you have to pay for first class mail. But if you're State Farm, then you probably definitely do care. You want the lowest rate possible. Okay, so that's why you want to respect all of these guidelines. The thing that can be the worst is if you mess up the envelope so bad that it doesn't even send at all. Okay, it's possible to get your envelope so wrong that like the post office will just send it back to you and be like, sorry, like this is an unusable envelope. We can't even use it. Okay, if that's the case, then your client is going to get really mad at you when you print 10,000 envelopes and they don't even work. Okay, so we need to make sure that these things work, especially for those high volume clients that are sending a lot of mail. And for people that work, this is not me. I never did too much different mailing pieces in my career, but for clients and agencies that work with a lot of like direct mail, like if they're one of the agencies that creates all the junk mail that you guys get, sometimes you actually take the piece to the post office to have them like sign off on it. It's kind of weird, but you can go to the post office and be like, hey, does this work? And if so, can you like sign this so that I have proof that this got checked off by you guys? So anyways, that's a process that sometimes happens. Any questions about this? Okay, Emma says, do the envelopes have to be dark or on light, or could you hypothetically invert the colors? Okay, Emma, that's a great question. Sometimes you see envelopes that are made with like black paper, but what's the problem with black paper envelopes is you can't print, oops, let me go back. You can't print a barcode on black paper, right? I guess you can if you have like special white ink, but the post office can't do that. So if you use dark paper, you're probably gonna cause your client to be paying first class mail. And also if you have black paper, then all of a sudden when you're trying to apply the name of the recipient, you're gonna have to like put some kind of mailing label on there and it's gonna get a little bit messy. Okay, so generally speaking, it's best if the paper that you create the envelope on is a light color so that the barcode and all these different things can print on top of it. Bianca says, in the white areas, can we put images, text on it? Yeah, okay, so yes, you can get kind of creative in some of these different areas, but I would say it's best to get creative on the back of the envelope more than the front. Okay, the front, it's good to keep it relatively clean, but you will see throughout this presentation that people do break these rules and it can be okay depending on the situation, depending on the context. All right, let's look at some examples of stationery. This is a company called Enya. This is a furniture company in Spain. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. So we have an envelope here. Does this envelope follow the postal guidelines? Yes or no on the postal guidelines for that envelope? Yeah, I think it does. It's maybe a little questionable because we have a logo kind of down here, but this is a spot where the logo is okay, right? We got the OCR read area, which is kind of here. We're kind of getting a little into that zone with the return address, but since the return address is really locked into the top left corner, I think that's going to be fine. We have the indicia area and the barcode area kept clear. So I think that this is fine. Okay. Maybe pushing it just a little bit, and notice how there's a ton of information here. On envelopes, usually you just put the return address, but they've decided to put a bunch of extra information as well. Okay, so they decided to do that. Another thing I'll mention about envelopes is some envelopes aren't even intended to be mailed. Okay, some envelopes just get hand delivered. And because of that, reason, if it's not an envelope that's meant for mailing, you can break whatever rules you want. But I would say for the context of this, project, let's do a actual mailable envelope. Rachel says, why email and the return address? It's not required. Okay. And if anything, this will probably confuse the post office a little bit, but they'll probably be okay with this. It's one chunky return address. That's a really big return address. Okay. I do agree with you. Okay. But I think that this passes the test. Okay. I think that this is going to mail just fine. In terms of the overall system, we've got a bigger envelope up here. This looks like it might be a larger envelope that can hold letter-sized documents just on its own without folding it. We've got the business card over here. We've got a letterhead, and the letterhead is another piece that you generally want to print on light paper, because remember, the letterhead is all about being able to print a letter on. And, office printers can't print with white ink, so you want to have the letterhead be with light colored paper. This letterhead looks like it's dark, but I can't even maybe it might be a folder of some kind, so I can't totally tell. Is that no display? Oh my gosh, we got no display making an appearance. All right. This business card is also using something called edge painting. Okay, so you can actually paint the edge of the business card, which is a really, really cool little trick. The way they do this, by the way, is after you print your business cards, they cut them, and then they kind of clamp them and paint the edge, which is actually a really, really cool effect, especially when you have a thicker business card. So this is a really slick business card. This probably costs a lot of money to produce. Another thing I'm noticing about this is the paper stock they're using is dark, right? It's like a navy color, but the ink that they're putting on top of it is white. Okay, so there's two ways to get this effect. The first way is to actually start with white paper and then print all the blue, right? You would just print all of this. This is called a knockout print, where you're printing everything and you're leaving an absence of the white, which gives you a dark color with white text. Okay, so that's probably the most typical way to do this. But in this case, I don't think that that's what they're doing, because it looks like the actual stock is the navy color. So I think what they're doing is printing with some kind of white ink or some kind of white foil. Okay, so this is some kind of foil that is opaque that can go on dark paper. So this is probably a relatively expensive print, especially with those cool painted edges. We used to do that with markers. That's a cool idea. Bianca says, how do we do that in AI? So this usually is something that you would like talk to the printer about. Okay, some printers do this, some don't. A lot of printers won't do this in-house, but they'll say, okay, if you want edge painting, we'll like ship off your business cards to this other vendor, and they'll do the edge painting. Okay, so this is something that kind of gets spec'd with the printer. Okay, they have a few pieces of collateral here, and this is actually a little bit of a brand guidelines. Oh yeah, no display. Yes, we love no display. Okay, just a few more pieces. Cool. I like this system. I like how there's a lot of different colors involved, right? And I like how they're pushing this kind of high-end aesthetic through the use of materials and through the very simple use of type. What do you all think about this type lockup? Do we like this type lockup or not really? Yes or no on the type lockup? So here's my take is it's kind of nice because it's very minimal. And I think they're going for this sort of minimalistic look. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to process this, right? Like my head has to do like a lot of thinking in order to figure out what is what. Okay. I'm also seeing that this is not a business card that's for a specific person. So some businesses actually do have generic business cards that they'll just like keep at the front of the store. So this isn't meant for a specific person. So it doesn't have anyone's name or title on there. And the email address is just a really typical, generic email address that, probably goes to a bunch of different people to answer questions. There's also 2 phone numbers. And one way that we sometimes label these different phone numbers is through a single letter. So T stands for telephone, F stands for fax. So that's what we got there. Yeah, there's basically no hierarchy to this, right? The only hierarchy is the order of information that they decide to go with. Yeah, maybe some different weights would be a little bit better. All right, cool. I agree with you. All right, let's take a look at this rebrand for Ogilvy. Okay, Ogilvy, what is Ogilvy? It's a pretty big advertising company. Okay. So we're seeing some different colors for their business cards. Okay, that's kind of a cool effect. When you see business cards with different colors like this, there's a couple different ways that can work. You either make it so that each person gets an individual color, right? Like, so for instance, here we've got Samantha Lee, who's a copywriter. Maybe Samantha Lee gets all blue business cards, and Samantha gets to choose what color she wants for her business card. She's like, I want the navy one. Okay. And her whole stack of cards is navy. But usually the way it works is each person gets a mix of all these different colors, right? So when you get your business cards from Ogilvy, you would get the stack, and like there would be 4 different colors and they'd all be mixed in the stack, which is actually really, really cool. It makes it so that when you're handing out cards, it's like a little bit more fun, it's a little bit more unexpected, and it just looks a little bit more creative. And by the way that they print these cards, because you might say, oh man, that must be really expensive to print all these different business cards and use all these extra colors. Because remember, when we are doing runs of printing, one of the major expenses is how many different colors we choose to use in that print. Okay, this is probably done with all Pantone colors. So you're like, oh man, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the black and 6 for the red. That's a lot of colors, right, for these business cards. But usually the way this works, and let me bring up like a clean document just so I can kind of spell this out. Okay, so usually the way this works when you're printing a bunch of business cards like that is you do it in big sheets, right? So when you do a professional business card print, you don't like print one card at a time and one card goes to the printer. No. Okay. What instead, the way it works is you print a lot of business cards on a really large sheet. Okay. So whatever size sheet the printer supports, you put like 1 million business cards on that sheet. Okay. And what you do in that style of print is you do an entire sheet. Okay. Imagine that I filled up this entire sheet with business cards. You do one sheet that's all blue and red. And then you do another sheet that's all the pink and red. And then you do another sheet that's all the yellow and red. And another sheet that's the red and white. Okay. And you print those in bulk. So you print like 1 million sheets of the blue and red, 1 million sheets of the pink and red, etc. So you have all these blanks. And then you store those blanks at the printer. And so when a new person comes to your company and needs business cards, instead of printing them from scratch, you actually pull a bunch of blanks out of the closet that you printed in bulk. And all you have to do is print the other side that just has the black and white information with their like email address and name. Okay. And because you're printing this in bulk, it actually doesn't cost very much money. And when you're doing this printout to give them a mix of different colors, you can give them like 4 sheets of the blue, 4 sheets of the red, 4 sheets of the yellow, 4 sheets of the pink. Their name goes on that. These all get cut out into individual cards and they get mixed and distributed to that person. Does that make sense? So it's actually kind of cool. It doesn't cost very much money to do these business cards with a lot of different colors on them. It actually doesn't cost much at all. Okay. It's just a little bit more complicated to manage. Okay, so there's their business cards. We're also seeing a little bit of a brand book, which is cool. And then here is their envelope. So thoughts on this envelope. Does this break postal guidelines? Or is this okay, this envelope? So this is probably a little borderline, but probably will work, right? Because remember that you have the barcode clear space down here. They have left a little bit of room down there, and the barcode usually prints pretty low. So I have a feeling that this would be fine, but this might be like a first-class mail type of situation. Okay. They've got the return address up here. They've kept the indicia area clear. They've got the OCR read area clear. Okay. So this probably is fine. And again, Ogilvy probably doesn't care very much if they have to pay for first-class mail, because they're not like bulk mailing a bunch of stuff. And, you know, Ogilvy is a really big advertising agency, so they probably don't care very much if they have to pay for first-class mail. But I would also argue that you could put the logo over here just as easily and it would probably look fine, right? Not really a big deal to have to move the logo. Why did they put the logo here, right? Why didn't they just put it over here where it wouldn't cause postal issues? Why? Why is it over on the right? Luke says for balance. Yeah, okay, it might be for balance. But really it's what Cole said. It's to match the system. Okay, so notice how on other pieces we have this system where the logo is placed in the bottom right corner. Sorry, I don't know my left and right. I have to like think about it. Okay, so the bottom right corner is where the logo is placed. And a lot of companies like to keep the logo placement and the lockup of information as unified as possible. Okay, so they decided to put it over here, even though it's a little bit risky. The other thing I'm seeing is that we have kind of an interesting blue color on the inside of the envelope, which is really nice. Okay, so the inside is blue, the outside is white. All right. Jared says for a second there, I thought the letter was the envelope itself. Yeah, so this is the actual letter. And you can see that the letterhead just has this information printed and just has this information printed. So the rest of the letterhead would be completely blank. And you would print a bunch of those letterheads out. And then when the client wanted to print a letter and send it off to Jane Smith or whatever, they would feed this through their office printer to print the actual letter on there. And usually when you deliver a letterhead, you also deliver like a Microsoft Word template that has the right fonts and has the right placement and margins so that when you print on top of the letterhead, it looks good. Okay, so that's what's happening over there. All right, we've got their brand book. This is actually a really cool brand book. We have this in our reading room at school. Some posters and some t-shirts. This is kind of a weird t-shirt, right? They literally put their contact information lockup on their t-shirt. Okay, that is dedication to keeping the system consistent. Even the t-shirt has the same lockup of information. I think they're just trying to be weird here. but it's kind of cool. Yeah. All right. So there's Ogilvy's system. Let's take a look at this hotel called Noel. Sometimes hotel stationery is like some of the coolest stuff. One thing that you'll see about with hotel stationery is they use different sizes. Okay, so like this envelope over here is not a number 10 standard envelope size. The reason for that is number 10 envelopes feel very businessy. And, you know, if we're sending like a piece of stationery from our hotel room to a loved one, we don't want to make it feel like a business correspondence. So we're using a size that's a little bit more appropriate for sending a personal letter. There's some writing pads. There's a business card here. I like how there's some really nice details in this, like the use of this kind of copper foil. And they also have this lockup with their logo where there's always kind of a vertical stripe that goes above and below the logo. Okay, so we're seeing that on their business card over here, and then they carry that vertical stripe into the back. I'm also noticing that they have these nice beveled corners. Okay, so obviously normal business cards just have square corners. You can get them with round corners. That's pretty common, but you can also do beveled corners. The way that these beveled corner business cards work is they get cut out by a special custom die cut, which is kind of like a cookie cutter for paper that cuts it into a very specific shape. So that's what we got here. Okay, here are the little door hangers and little details in the envelope, right? Like underneath the envelope flap, it says a note between friends. That's a nice little detail. Postcards are a really nice piece of stationery for a hotel and for businesses. Okay, thoughts on this postcard? There's maybe one issue with this postcard. What's the issue that I'm seeing in the postcard? Okay, Bianca says barcode area. Beth says no divider. Okay, what I'm seeing, and you're not wrong about those comments, but what I'm seeing is what Monica is seeing, which is this side, this, like, it looks like they have two different colored paper that they use for the postcard, right? This one seems like it would work just fine because you can write on top of this. But what if you're using the green postcard, right? Like, how are you supposed to write on top of this dark green? It just feels like that wouldn't work. Okay, so if I'm trying to send like a postcard to someone and I'm like, dear mom, like this hotel is so nice, but then you can't read it because it's like you're doing black on top of green. Okay, so that doesn't seem like it would work unless you had some kind of special pen, right? It feels like this wouldn't work. So I guess I just don't really understand what's happening with that. Maybe in the hotel room, they have special like gold pens, or yeah, Terry says pencil. Maybe with a pencil, it could work, right? But I question this a little bit. It's like, why not just make it a light color? Okay, so this is kind of like a letterhead. You want it to be light because you want people to be able to write on it. Yeah, maybe they have white pens in the room. Okay, a few more touch points from them. And they even have, you know, custom pens and pencils. These are really cool to have for businesses. This might be something that you consider doing as your fourth piece. Tote bags and gifts can also be really great. Okay, and the secret to tote bags or other types of gifts is don't just plaster your logo on it. Your stationery system will get really boring, especially with these gifts, if you just like put your logo on it and that's it. Because no one really wants to just like, you know, tote your logo around. That's not really fun to just be a walking advertisement for whatever your business is. But if you really work to create a tote bag that people actually want to use, then it actually has way more impact. And you can include your logo, but maybe your logo is small and it's more about copywriting or more about illustration or graphic elements or something that really makes us want that tote bag. In this case, I think, you know, we got some really cool copywriting. This is referring to the location of the hotel, Nashville. And then we also have really nice color blocking with the peach handle and the sort of maroon body of the bag. It's really, really nice. Okay, here's the laundry bag, ruffled feathers. I love how they get creative with copywriting here, like you wild animal you, after you finish your coffee, right? Because you're wild for finishing that whole cup of coffee. Or screw it on the, whatever that is, the corkscrew. They even have some custom numbers and typography for this system, which is really cool. Okay, let's take a look at Oaksy. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce this. This is a Norwegian UX agency. So a couple things I'm noticing about this stationery system. One is that it's very minimalist. Okay, a lot of design agencies have very minimalist stationery systems because there's something nice about minimalist stationery in that it has this kind of more focused look that's easier to engage with. And I think that's especially important in a UX agency, which is all about creating these sort of seamless experiences for customers. They've got a cool logo here. This is a word mark that has kind of these horns in it. I think it's still pretty readable. They're able to pull those horns as an icon to apply to different things, like in this case, a book. Their business card has very large typography. Okay, this is really huge typography for a business card. But I'll say that large typography on business cards is kind of a trend right now, and it's kind of cool. Okay. So that might be something that you consider, especially if you have a business card that has limited information. What is missing on this business card? Like, what is the important thing that isn't here that I said everyone has to have on their business card? Not the physical address, because I said that that's optional. I don't even have it on mine. The name, no, we got the name. That's here at the top. Yeah, okay, so it's the website. The website is the thing that's missing. I'll say that some businesses don't put their website on there because, I don't know, it's almost like a little bit of a debate in the design community about whether the website needs to be included, because technically it's part of the email address, right? If you have custom email addresses, then the website is kind of already there. Okay, so I'll say that you can make an argument that the website address is not needed if you have your email address and if it's a custom email address. I personally think that this is okay depending on the target audience, right? And that's where a lot of these rules can be broken. Who's your target audience? If your target audience is very sophisticated and knows email addresses all day long, right, then maybe you can get away with something like this. If you have a target audience that's really broad, then you probably don't want to take so many risks with your basic contact information, okay? So for a UX agency, this is, their clients are going to be like other businesses. They understand business cards and websites, and they're probably not going to be confused by this little detail. And so by removing that website address, it's kind of nice. It kind of cleans up the look of their business card, which is a good look. Okay, so I think that they're able to get away with that here. Luke says, could you put a QR code? QR codes are becoming big again, okay? There was a while where people kind of thought that QR codes were going to die in the United States. They've been popular in Asia for a really long time, but QR codes are back. People love QR codes. They kind of came back during the pandemic because people started using them in things like restaurant menus. And also they've become big because Apple finally included a QR reader in the default phone camera app, which makes it much easier to scan, because before that, it kind of required you to download a special app. So people didn't really know how to use them. So yes, QR codes can be interesting as an element in business cards. It's definitely not needed, but you might consider using a QR code either for some kind of creative twist or just as a redundant way to link to your website. Okay, we also have some cool illustrations here, and we have a very focused color palette of mostly white and yellow, which is kind of nice. Okay, sometimes I like a lot of color. Sometimes having a more focused color palette can be really effective, because when you see that yellow and black and white palette, it just screams the name of this company. Here's a different version of their business card that's printed on yellow stock, which is cool. And then this brand also has these great illustrations, which I really love. One thing that will happen to a lot of you is when you go to make your stationery, you'll be like, okay, I got my logo. I've got my typefaces that I've decided on. I've got my color palettes. But when you start to apply all this stuff, you'll realize that the brand kind of needs one more thing at the very least, right? If all you have is your logo, your color, and your type, it'll just end up looking a little plain and bland. Sometimes you can pull it off with just those elements. Like Ogilvy, I think, is one of those circumstances where just color and type kind of works, okay? Because their color palette is interesting and their type is really beautiful. Okay, so they're kind of making it work. But in most brands, you kind of need like at least one other thing. Other than your logo, other than your color palette, other than your type, you need one more thing. Sometimes that can be patterns, sometimes that can be illustration, sometimes that can be copywriting, sometimes that can be like wild graphic elements. But that one more thing is often what we're kind of searching for in your brand. Okay, so for this brand, we've got the use of these illustrations, which are really great. I love how they're kind of cute and almost feel like a kindergartner did it. Okay, but then the way that they're applying it makes it feel sophisticated. All right, here's their tote. Again, you can see how this is a really great tote because it's got that cool illustration on it. The logo is there, but it's much smaller, right? And this makes me want to kind of rock this tote bag because it's kind of cool, right? It's just kind of nice. If all this had was a giant logo on it, then I would feel a little bit less enthusiastic about using it. All right, let's look at Paradise Art Space. This is a art gallery or art space in South Korea. Um, so couple things I'm noticing here. This is an interesting system. Instantly, I'm like, this is interesting. Their logo is kind of split into different pieces, right? So remember when we looked at Ogilvy, we noticed that their logo was generally placed in the bottom right corner of documents. Okay. For this logo, it's kind of interesting, but they have like 3 letters for Paradise Art Space, and those are always placed in top left, bottom right. And then in the top right, they always have the word mark for Paradise Art Space. Okay, so that's kind of their system. Of course, that's a tricky lockup, and it doesn't work on everything. So for instance, here, and this looks like some kind of folder, which probably mails, they put a divider line and they lock up all of those components in the same locations relative to that divider line. Okay. I'm also seeing that they have multiple envelopes. Like here's an envelope and here's an envelope. These, okay, maybe they're not exactly number 10 sizes, but I have a feeling that this over here is an envelope that is not intended to mail, right? They probably are using this envelope to deliver something really specific, or maybe it's, to hand deliver certain things, or maybe it's meant to like be used for like a certain trifold brochure or something, right? And yeah, this envelope is going to cause problems at the post office because the return address is like taken up by some P, the indicia, like every spot is like blocked by these kind of logo arrangement. This envelope here could mail. Okay. It needs a return address, but the return address could be perhaps on the back flap. And this could mail because we have the indicia area, clear space for the barcode, and the OCR. Okay. So by including that divider line, we're able to maintain this lockup and still have it mail. So they've got an interesting system here, and they're having to make some weird choices in order to make that system work. It also looks like they've got some kind of graphic lines, which are kind of cool that they're using on that brochure. And then they also have images of the artwork. All right, cool. Okay, one other thing I'm seeing is they have kind of a combination of this mint green paper, which is really, really light, and a bright white. Okay, so those 2 color pieces are part of the system as well. Here's their letterhead. Again, letterhead is kept mostly blank. They're having to put the logo elements kind of in this top area. So in this case, they put a vertical or horizontal divider to kind of lock the logo into the top zone. And then the contact information is really, really small at the bottom. Okay, I'll say right now that a lot of you will end up making your information too big on your letterhead or on your business card. It's okay if you're going intentionally for a big size, but this information wants to be kept relatively small. So it's there if someone needs it, but it's mostly about keeping the letterhead blank so that we could put a letter on it. Okay, here's the back of their envelope. So on the back of their envelope, we actually have the return address not on the flap, but instead kind of underneath the flap. Okay, so this feels like maybe it's going to require first-class mail. Although I admit that I don't know the postal guidelines in South Korea. These postal guidelines tend to be somewhat international. Okay, sometimes you also have a large envelope. A large envelope can fit a letter-sized paper without folding it. And then we also have a pocket folder. Pocket folders can be really cool as your 4th item. If you want a little bit of a challenge, consider doing a pocket folder. Pocket folders are really great kind of piece that universally, works well for a lot of businesses. So we've got, in this case, the cobalt interior. We've got these kind of flaps, and those can contain different pieces of information. We also have some kind of raised areas of the paper. Some print processes, like letterpress, can leave an indentation when you print. Okay, so if we have an indentation, like if the lettering is lower than the rest of the paper, that's called a deboss. Okay, if the letter is a little bit raised up and is higher than the paper, that's called an emboss. So this is an emboss because this P is actually a little bit like it would stick out past the edge of the paper just a little bit. Or maybe it's a deboss. It's kind of like one of those optical illusions where I can't tell if it's like coming towards me or going away. Okay, but this is either an emboss or a deboss. And when you do a emboss or a deboss, the opposite effect will happen on the inside of the paper, right? Because if we leave an impression on this side of the folder, the other side of the folder will have the opposite effect. But one thing to note is that that effect on the other side will be reflected. So we'll have kind of a backwards P on the inside of the envelope. Okay, so some different trifolds and a little bit more of their system. What do y'all think about this system? thumbs up or thumbs down? Do we like this or no? Yes or no? I kind of like this. It's a little kind of weird and risky, but I think for an art situation, this makes sense, right? Because they're trying to kind of like break rules. They're trying to be like a little bit kind of strange and take some creative decisions. Okay, that's sometimes important for certain brands, like in the space of art. Okay, a lot of people are like it, but also don't like it. Yeah, I feel you. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at Nomad Hill. This is a travel agency. So this is definitely a brand that has an extra thing, right? Remember how I talked about you need the logo, you need your color palette, you need your type. They also have this kind of cool illustration style. One thing I'm seeing about their illustration is I don't know why it's sometimes in black and white and sometimes in color. I'm kind of like, wait, what is it? Is it black and white or is it color? I would probably prefer that it be kept in one or the other. And I do like the color a little bit more. Like I actually really like this piece of illustration. Oops, this piece of illustration down here on the back of the business card. I'm also seeing that the contact information here is not kept as consistent as in other brands. Like for instance, this information up here is in gray, but on the business card, it's in black. Also, this is split up horizontally at the top of the document, whereas here it's at the bottom and it's stacked vertically. This also has a little bit of an orange separator line, but there's no orange separator line visible on the letterhead. Okay. Is this a huge issue? Not really, right? But it's that lack of consistency is not as professional as if it was kept really consistent. Okay. So I'm a little bit troubled by the fact that that's not exactly consistent. I would say probably the biggest sin of this, I don't know, at least for me, the biggest sin of this inconsistency is actually what's happening right here. Okay, sorry that there's only like 4 pixels, but we have multiple phone numbers. I know this is probably impossible to see, but there's 2 phone numbers here. And on the business card, those phone numbers are defined with little labels. So it says like phone and fax, and it says the full word. But on the letterhead, those phone numbers are actually defined with with a single letter, right? So it says like P and E for email. Then when we get down here, it's like a full, like that's annoying. Okay, I hate that they switch systems for the way that they label their phone numbers. So I can somewhat forgive that they didn't keep everything totally consistent, but the fact that the labeling isn't the same, I'm like, no, get that out of here. I hate that. Other than that, I think this is a cool brand. Okay, I like the logo. I like the color palette. I'm probably being a little too hard on them. Okay, but no, here's another inconsistency. Like now all of a sudden we're in orange. And right, like I'm like, why is it gray? It's orange, it's black. There's an orange separator here. There's no separator there. Black and white illustration, color illustration. Like, why not make these things consistent? Okay. It would be different if it was a brand that was intentionally trying to be all over the place and it was a really like funky, crazy, creative brand. That would be different. But that's not what they're doing here. It feels like they're trying to create a really unified system and they just kind of messed up, right? Like maybe it's just me. Even here we have the logo in gray. I don't like that. I'm just like, make that orange. The logo is orange. Okay. So I'm actually bothered a little bit by the inconsistencies in this system. Bianca says, especially how they went with full spelling on the smaller paper. Okay, I missed that. But yeah, there's a lot of inconsistencies in here. Even though this is cool visually, I just question some of those decisions. Okay, here they have a large size envelope. This is done with a knockout print. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that this envelope started as white and they flooded the entire envelope with orange to create this kind of knocked out effect. I'm pretty sure that that's how this is done. I have a feeling. Okay, we have a little bit of some kind of print document here and then a little bit more of their system. Their illustration is cool. I like their illustration. Okay, but here again, this is like different. Like now the logo type is in brown, right? It's like it was orange, gray, brown. I'm like, it's all over the place. And it doesn't feel like they're doing it to be creative. It feels like they're doing it like sloppily. Okay, that's what I see here. I'm probably being a little too harsh on this brand. It's actually really cool. Let's look at another hotel. This can be good inspiration if you want to create a real theme to your business or to your brand story. This is a hotel designed by an agency called Foreign Policy. It's called Wanderlust. This is kind of an old piece, but I quite like the creativity here. Okay, so this whole hotel is kind of based around travel. They have some pretty interesting features, like for instance, their business cards, which are designed like luggage tags. Okay. And then I really like how their letterhead, and by the way, letterheads have two sides. So I want you to consider not just the front of the letterhead, but also the back of the letterhead. I like how their letterhead has instructions on the back for how to fold it into a paper airplane. That's really cool. Okay. If you can create some kind of like little story with your letterhead or give some kind of way that it can be reused, it can be really, really interesting. And I think this and the way it connects to kind of travel is a nice little detail. The other thing they have on their letterhead is a little bit of a pattern. It's kind of hard to see in this photo, but there's a little airplane here, and then there's like a little dotted line that kind of bounces around throughout the entire document. Okay. If you put pattern on the front of your letterhead, you of course want to keep it really, really light. Because remember, we're going to print a letter on here, right? So we don't want some really intense pattern that's going to make it impossible to read the type after we print the letter. So I think it's smart that they kept this really, really light with low opacity so that the letter can still be read. Another cool little detail that you sometimes see on letterheads, and this could be a really nice detail for you all to include, is it's a little bit of an old kind of convention to put some kind of icon or element a third way down the page. The reason that we do that is because it helps when you're folding this into thirds, because that's how you have to fold it in order to stuff it into a number 10 envelope. It kind of helps to have a little mark a third way down, because it's hard to fold things into thirds, right? Everyone's tried to fold things into thirds and you always like miss it a little bit. So having that little icon there is a nice helper to the person who's doing the folding. And it's also a nice little detail and a convention that you sometimes see. Okay, so that's what's happening here. That is placed specifically a third down the page. Okay, what else we got? We've got that same pattern happening on the inside of the envelope, and even a little bit of copywriting. It says, "We wish you a sweet escape." Okay, the inside of the envelope is really, really nice. It is a really nice place to put a lot of detail, right? Because on the outside of the envelope, there's not too much we can do. We got to keep it relatively blank. But on the inside, lining the interior of the envelope can be a really cool place to like do something a bit bold, because it doesn't get in the way at all. And it's kind of a cool detail that when you open up the envelope, all of a sudden there's something printed on the inside. Okay, so that could be a really, really cool little detail. Let me talk a bit about envelopes really quick. And I'm going to switch. How do I switch cameras here? Okay, here we go. Let's go to camera 2. All right, here we go. Let me see. Am I in focus? Let's focus. All right, that's pretty good. So I want to talk just a little bit about how envelopes get printed. And there's kind of like two different types of ways that you might print an envelope. Okay. Hold on a sec. Let me make sure I can see chat. All right. So the first way that you would print an envelope is with what's called a pre-converted envelope. Okay. So if you're printing on using a pre-converted envelope, basically what you do is you start with an envelope that's already folded. Okay. That's what I have here. And you can get these, from like Office Depot. These are printed in bulk. And when you print on top of a pre-converted envelope, you start with a pre-folded envelope. And then what happens is this gets run through the printer, and you can apply like your logo and your return information and any graphics that you want to include on the envelope, go through and get applied to the envelope that's already been folded and is already kind of good to go. Okay. The reason that we sometimes print envelopes this way is it's cheaper, because with a pre-converted envelope, you're able to build these envelopes in bulk, and you buy them for really, really cheap. They get printed in bulk, and you get shipped like 1 million of these envelopes, and they just go through and get like your basic information printed on them. Okay, so a pre-converted envelope is really, really cheap. If you work with like an online printer, like if you go with something like Vistaprint, they're usually going to work with a pre-converted envelope, and they'll give you specific zones where you can print. So in a pre-converted envelope, you're kind of limited to what you can do, because you can't print all the way to the edge. You probably can't flood whole parts of the document. Sometimes there's even limitations to where you can print. So like if you want to print something here, that might not be available. Okay. Definitely you'll be able to print kind of in the front area, but there might even be limitations to that as well. Okay. So pre-converted envelopes are really practical. They work well for clients that don't do a lot of mailing and just need some envelopes. And it's a good way to work with envelopes through something like an online printer. Okay, so that's how pre-converted envelopes work. There's also something called a custom envelope, and custom envelopes are what I want to focus on in this class. Okay. So custom envelopes work a little bit differently because with custom envelopes, you start with just a flat page. Okay. This is already cut out, but with a custom envelope, you just start with a flat page and you print it when it's flat. Okay. So you print it before it's been cut or folded. Because of that, you have much more control to print anywhere you want, right? So, when I fold this up, okay, if I fold this, this comes up, these come in, and you can kind of see how the envelope works. It's a little hard to see that, but I think you can see, right? That's how the envelope works. So this is the back of the envelope, and this is the front of the envelope. When I unfold this, you can see that everything on the exterior of the envelope is on one side of the page. Everything on the interior of the envelope is on the other side of the page. So if I wanted the interior of the envelope to be flooded with a pattern, I could just print the pattern and just flood this entire sheet. That gets cut out, okay? On this side, you would print, the return address or whatever you wanted on the outside of the envelope, okay? That all gets cut out. And then those flat sheets that have been cut out go to go through a process where they get cut, they get folded, they get glued, and they get turned into final envelopes. Okay. They'll also have a little bit of adhesive applied to the top, either a self-adhesive or some kind of adhesive that you have to moisten in order to get it to stick. Okay. So that's the difference between a custom envelope and a pre-converted envelope, right? With a custom envelope, we can do whatever we want. With a pre-converted envelope, we got to sort of accept the form how it is. Obviously, there's different envelopes you can buy. This is what's called a security envelope. And that's because it has this pattern printed on the inside that is meant to obscure type so that no one can look through the envelope and see what's inside. Okay. With a custom envelope, we can choose the paper we want. We can choose the shape. Okay. So we can even customize the shape and size of the flap. And we can print wherever we want, including on the inside of the envelope. Okay, so those are the differences. Any questions about this? That makes sense, right? Pre-converted versus custom. For this project, I want to focus on what's called a custom envelope. Okay, really quick, before we get back to some different examples, let me share my screen. One thing I put in Canvas for you all to use are some different envelope templates. Okay, so I put 3 different templates for you all to use. There's what's called the commercial style template, which is the one that we just looked at. And you can see that, it's got the different flaps, right? This is going to fold up. And this up here is kind of a preview of what it looks like when it's folded. Okay. So if you want to use this style of envelope, you can start with this template. There's also what's called the side flap. Side flap is kind of cool because it actually opens from the side. So you can see that there's kind of a bigger flap on this side and the adhesive gets applied here. So you open it and kind of pull all the documents out from the side, which is kind of a nice little detail. And there's also the square flap, which is a little bit more minimalist. Okay. So square flap, side flap, commercial style. And then you can actually customize from here. So let's say you want some kind of really specific custom flap shape. You could actually start with one of these templates and then customize from there. As long as it works, it's totally okay for this project. Okay. But these are the templates I want you to start with. And I'll show you kind of how to work with these probably on Wednesday. Okay, we'll go through that process a little bit. Okay, so that's how those envelope templates work. Let me switch my camera. I'm tired of looking at my hand. All right, let me turn down my light. It's too bright. Okay, here we go. We're being blinded. All right, so that is the hotel. Let's look at a few more. Thoughts on this one? What are some things that we're noticing about this stationary system? Do we like it? Do we not like it? And what's interesting about this? Okay, I'm noticing a couple things. There's a couple weird things that I'm noticing. Okay, we like it. Yeah, I like this too. This is really cool. I actually think that this is a Pentagram project. I think Pentagram designed this, if I remember correctly. Okay, we're a sucker for black on black. The colors are interesting. Yeah. Okay, the DBoss. Yeah, we have a DBoss over here. Okay. And by the way, when you do this with a DBoss or with an emboss, this is what's called a blind hit. Okay, so if you create like an impression on something, but you don't apply any ink or foil, that's called a blind hit, which can be really, really subtle because you get your logo, but the logo is just kind of an impression. Okay, so I think that probably the weirdest thing about the system is the size of the logo. Okay, remember how I said like every brand needs like one other thing? I would say the one thing for this brand, aside from the color palette and the type, is they're applying their logo big. That's weird. Okay, usually logos are applied small. Okay, so the twist here is that the logo is large. It's large on the business card. It fills the entire business card. This looks like some kind of like large envelope. It fills the entire shape. This is a bookmark because I believe this is some kind of publishing company, and the logo is as big as it can get on that bookmark. The only exception is on the letterhead. And the reason for that is if we put the logo huge on the letterhead, you wouldn't even be able to fit the letter. Okay, so if we're on the letterhead, they actually kept it a little bit more simple. This also has some minor inconsistencies, but I think it's more forgivable because it's more about the placement. And I can really see why they wanted to place all the information along the bottom of the letterhead where that didn't quite work on the business card. So unlike Nomad Hill, I'm okay with these different placements because things are mostly kept consistent and they don't have any glaring inconsistencies. Okay, so I think that this is really cool. And then I also like how they have all this black and white, but then they have this pop of really bright green color. That's really cool. Okay, I love that. As a palette, that green color really sets it off. And sometimes when you're working with a really minimalist black and white brand, it really helps to bring in a color. Otherwise, you start to look like all the other brands that use black and white. So anyways, that's a few things I'm noticing. I quite like this system. I think this is really, really nice. Here's their business card, again, with the huge logo. They also have some hierarchy. Okay, so compared to that furniture company we looked at the beginning, this has a little bit of hierarchy, right? The name and the title for Donna Payne is large at the top. It's a little unusual to have the title to be the same size as the name, okay? But that is much larger. And then they have a different font that they're using for the smaller information. And they also have some spacing, right? So instead of having everything with no space, they're at the very least separating this contact information from the physical address. Okay, so they put some space between those two elements. All right. A few more shots of their system. Remember how I said I don't like just the logo on the bag? This one I kind of like because it's a beautiful logo and it's big, right? So again, this just feels a little different because it's kind of connected to the system. What are some other things that we could do to this bag? Anyone else have ideas? Like, what are some ideas of how we could bring a twist into this bag? Even though I actually kind of like this bag, what are some other possibilities?
What
Pop-up
industry
green.
is this bag in, or this
Sorry?
company in? What industry is this company in?
They're a publishing company. Yeah, so a pop-up green does come to mind. Yeah, maybe it's the green coming into the handle. I think that could be a really cool idea, right? If this handle was like a different fabric and had that green color in it, that could be really, really cool. Althea says, add a quote. I quite like that, Althea, right? Maybe there's some kind of messaging or some kind of quote here. That could be really interesting. It could be cool to have on one side the big logo and on the other side it says something about publishing. There's some kind of quote or copywriting. Could be really, really cool. Beth says varied letter sizes. I wouldn't do that with the logo, but that could be cool to play around with other elements in the bag. Bianca says simple illustration made out of shapes, nothing too detailed. I could see that too, Bianca. So if they added an illustration to this brand, that could also be really cool. As it stands, I think this brand does have enough things, and it's interesting how they leverage their logo as almost like a graphic element because it gets so big. So anyways, that's what I'm seeing here. It's a cool system. Okay, here's another furniture company. This is cool. I quite like this furniture company. This feels maybe just slightly more dated than the other one we looked at for some reason. It's interesting how they have this like dotted line that comes down and connects with their logo. Okay, so that's part of their system. And these dots are also used as a dot pattern, which goes on the back of the business card and on other elements like the notebook. Okay. The orange on the interior of the envelope is also really nice detail. Okay, we can only do this with a custom envelope. Yeah, so I quite like this system. They also have a mailing label. So this is another way that you can do, what am I saying? You can do custom envelopes. You can either print a custom envelope or you can just print a label that can be stuck on standard envelopes. So some companies opt for that because it can be a little bit more practical and you can use that mailing label for envelopes of all different sizes. Okay, cool. I quite like this. It's a little simple, but the dot pattern is adding a lot. I like how the pocket folder is a little bit special. Most pocket folders have pockets along the bottom, right? So a standard pocket folder kind of looks like this. You have 2 pockets. This one has more of a vertical pocket where all the information tucks in. Okay, so that's kind of cool. There might be the chance that this like makes papers kind of slip out, but I don't think so, because I think there's a little bit of a bottom edge here that kind of holds all that in. I think for some reason, like one thing that's maybe making this feel just slightly dated is the amount of information they have like on their letterhead, right? It's almost like they cram too much in there, and it's taking away from, it's like when you add more, you're actually taking away from everything else. And yeah, we've got like the logo, we've got this line, we've got like a tagline. The tagline's kind of long. We've got like a million different like addresses and email. It just feels like a lot. Okay, so I think that might be causing this to feel not as elevated as some of the other brands that we looked at. Okay, Jacob asked about showing things digitally. So I would say that most digital things aren't part of a stationary system, but I'll allow you guys, if you want to do something digital, I'll allow you to do it as your 4th item. So even if you want to do like a website hero section or something like that, I'll allow that for this as your 4th item. But yeah, for some brands, the digital things are really, really important. And when you're showing digital things to a client, you can sometimes show it in like a device mockup, or you can just show it, really simply in a frame. All right. They're also using some transparent paper. This type of paper is called vellum. So it has a little bit of transparency. That's kind of cool. And then tape. Tape is one of the coolest things that you can brand because it's useful. You're sending a package or a gift, you can just tape it with your custom tape, which is quite nice. All right, let's look at motive. Okay, this one I really love. I instantly love this one. Why do we love this one? Or is it just me? Do we love it or is it just me? Gina says love it. Okay, why? Why do we love this so much? I feel like it's hitting really hard. There's a couple things that I'm noticing. One is the color palette. The colors are really, really great. And yeah, I love how there's some like brighter colors, some more muted colors, but color palettes that really, certain color palettes just hit really hard. And I think this is one of those situations. Yeah. We also really like the type. And yeah, you notice how the logo is really simple typography, but it has little details, right? Like the V and the M have this kind of flat spot, which is really, really cool. The M also has these angled construction that feels kind of like the V. And then the O is turned sideways. It kind of has like this wide O, right? And those little details make this feel really custom and cool rather than just a piece of generic type. And then, yeah, Luke is pointing out the stripes and the graphic elements. Absolutely. I love that. And, again, we can only do this with a custom envelope and a custom pocket folder, but notice how they have this angle to the stripes. And that angle is the exact angle that they've used for the pocket in the pocket folder. That is a nice detail, right? The fact that lines up perfectly. The same is true up here in the envelope, that the flap on the envelope is done. This is a little bit of a steeper angle than is standard for this type of envelope, but they made it a little steeper to match that angle. And that way that contrast flap has that angle and it perfectly aligns. That is so nice. Okay, I love that. Then they also have some other graphic elements that they're using on the interior of the pocket folder. Look at how simple they're keeping the information here. Okay, I love this. This is cool. This is a wine brand, by the way. Here's more of their pocket folder. This is another thing that you'll see in pocket folders is sometimes they have a little slot where you can put your business card, which is kind of a nice detail, so that if you're delivering a bunch of information, you can also stick your business card in there. That helps people who are in sales, when they're delivering stuff to a potential client or a lead. Okay, that flap has even more going on than I thought, which is really cool. Okay, so I love that. That one's probably my favorite so far of this presentation. Okay, this brand is from a dermatologist's office. This is in Spanish, so I don't totally understand what what all the messaging is. But yeah, I quite like this also. Very different feel from the previous brand. This one's much more reserved, much more restrained. But I actually think it's cool how they have messaging, right? And even with me not even knowing what this messaging means, I think that that is kind of a cool element. You know, bringing in copywriting could be really, really interesting. Even on the business card, you know, on the back, they're putting in this copywriting, and then they have the rest of the information on the other side. And then I think this color combination is quite nice. This is a kind of a cool fourth item, right? So remember how I was saying that that fourth item, if you choose something that's really specific for your company, it can be really great. This looks like it's some kind of appointment reminder or something like that. Okay, appointment reminder makes a lot of sense for this type of business for a dermatologist. Yeah, elegant upscale. That's a good way to put it, Bianca. I agree. Okay, here's their business card. Yeah, so just a few of their pieces. Envelope is passing the test, right? They are going a little non-standard here with most of their information on the back, but they're keeping the important areas clean for the post office. You even have a custom water bottle. It looks like it would probably be hard to write on that part of the folder, but okay, they probably have a system for that. I like this. This is a nice detailed look. And I agree that it feels kind of upscale and elegant. Just is to prevent the loss of firm skin. Okay, there you go. Cool. All right. And then one more. This is from a catering company. What do we think about this system? Do we like this one? This is another one that's really, really colorful. And I quite like it. I think this is cool. The color palette here is working pretty well, but maybe it's not holding together as well as that other system. For some reason, it feels like a little bit all over the place. Okay. But I still think that it holds together because it's just generally very vibrant. So they've got patterns here, and these patterns actually come from the logo, right? And that might be something that you can build is like, you know, if you have a certain construction of a logo, you can actually take parts of that and build a pattern out of it. So like, for instance, these pieces of the H and J, you can see like get built into this. The plus like goes into this pattern over here, right? So like we're building all these different patterns out of those components, which is really, really cool. Yeah, I like I do like the vibrant too. Luke says, I feel like it should be on all black backgrounds. The white backgrounds is throwing me off. Okay, maybe that's it, is the fact that we have like different color backgrounds, the brown, the white, and the black. You know, it's kind of like a little bit all over the place. The business cards I'm really liking. Business cards are pretty slick. I'm kind of assuming that the logo color is going to match the back color. I'm kind of assuming that that's the way this works, but I'm not totally sure. Happy birthday cards. So this would be, you know, a lot of companies have thank you cards. Birthday cards are a little bit less common, but thank you cards are really, really common. Okay, I have no idea what this system is. It looks like probably this is part of the birthday card. So presumably if you're like turning 23, they punch out the 2 and the 3. But then what happens if you're turning 22? Then what do you do? You know, like I guess I don't understand how this system works, but okay, cool idea, I guess. But I don't get how it works. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe they just, if you're turning 22, they just don't send you a card that year. They're like, whatever. Free confetti. Yeah, and you get free confetti. Okay. Tissue paper could be really cool. A lot of brands do custom tissue papers because, you know, especially if they're doing a lot of packaging of different items, this can be a really great way to have a universal system to package stuff. Okay, bags printed with the pattern. This is cool. I like this. All right. Yeah, you don't get a card when you're 22. Okay, so hopefully that's some good inspo for you all. What I want you to do is for next class is just think through some different stationery items that you want to create for your brand. Actually, sorry, everyone is creating the business card, the number 10 envelope, and the letterhead. Okay, so everyone's creating those 3, but then you're also creating a 4th element that can be anything from this list or basically anything. Okay, for that 4th item. So 4 items total. Everyone's doing a business card. Everyone's doing a number 10 envelope. Everyone's doing a business size letterhead. You pick the 4th item. Any questions about this?
I only had one question. If we don't have our logo together.
Yeah, so keep working on the logo. Okay. And you can kind of like dip your toes into building some of this stuff, but I would say mostly just think about what you want to create, because next class, I'm going to kind of demo the process of putting this all together. Okay, so we'll work together on a stationery system, and we'll also talk about the brand guidelines next class.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So we're just choosing, we're not actually doing.
That's right. Just kind of think through this. If you want to, you can start sketching a little bit of your stationery, but I mostly want you to push forward on your logo. And yeah, think about what that fourth item is going to be. And then, yeah, next class on Wednesday, we'll keep going on this. Okay, any other questions? All right, everyone, let's end there tonight.
Can I ask you a question private
You
after
may.
class?
Please
Thank you.
stick around. Oh, and Gabriel asked, can the business card be vertical? Gabriel, yes, the business card can be vertical. Slightly non-standard, but it's not very uncommon. One thing I don't particularly like, although sometimes I see it, is when one side of the business card is vertical and the other side is horizontal. I personally don't like that because it can get really disorienting. But yes, vertical business cards aren't too uncommon. You can absolutely do that. And again, you can even break the size of the business card. You want to do a square business card, long business card, mini business card, that's totally fine. But just be prepared to back up those design decisions and just consider the fact that you might cause some issues for the client. That might be worth it, but maybe not. Okay, so just consider that when you're playing around with non-standard sizes. All right, everyone, have a great night. I'll see you all on Wednesday. We'll talk more about stationery and we'll get into brand guidelines. Take care.
Okay. Bradford, can I ask one quick question?